Hi, I'm Melissa, and this is The Book Break. And this week in our series for authors, I'm going to talk to a veteran author who has lots of contract experience and advice to offer, Eric Flint. Let's go! All right, thanks for joining us to talk to Eric Flint. Thank you so much, Eric.
Yes, sir.
So at this conference, you teach a lot because you have been published since how long have you had books out?
My first novel came out over 22 years ago, in fall of 1997.
Yeah.
And I've been writing full-time for about 20 years.
Yeah. And some of the things that you talk about, one of the classes that I've been to that I think is super memorable is about contracts.
Yeah.
Can you give our potential authors out there some ideas of what are things they should be watching for in contracts?
Well, what I tell people to do first, when they look at a contract, the first clause will explain what you're selling and how broad the rights are and so forth. So you got to look at that. But other than that, the thing I want authors to concentrate on, skip over all the fun stuff about the advance and the royalties and all that, and make sure you've got good reversion rights. In other words, reversion rights are how do you get your book back?
Okay.
And good publishers, the reversion rights are set up in such a way that it should be clear, it should be reasonable, and you need the time, I don't know how to call it, the times have to be either absolute or things you control, not something the publisher controls.
Okay.
That's a key thing. So, if it's like, for instance, this is pretty standard contract for a major commercial publisher is you sell the rights and you sell them for 12 years, okay? But if they produce a hardcover or a trade paperback copy, they have it for the life of the copyright, which is 70 years after your death.
Oh, wow.
But you got to make sure all this language is in there. But if they let it go out of print, and this is true even if they only do a mass market paperback, if they let it go out of print after 5 years, then you can send them a letter saying either put it back into print or the rights revert back to me.
Yeah.
But you have to make sure that what out of print means is specified in the contract, because you want to make sure that it's clear that print on demand does not count as still being in print. And if it's only being produced electronically, you have to set some kind of bar. In my publisher, if it stops generating $2,000 worth of income in a year, and electronics the only edition, then the rights will revert back to you. The point is, make sure that it's set up so that you can get your rights back, because a lot of contracts are terrible that way, and you can wind up basically, in practice, giving away your rights forever.
Yeah.
That's what it amounts to. So that's the first thing I tell them to do, is focus on that. Then you can back up and look at the other stuff. But whatever else you do, make sure you can get the book back.
Yeah, that's great.
And
another type of contract that I've heard you talk about before is when you are writing in like a co-author situation.
Yeah.
Because you have written, co-authored a number of books. Tell us a little bit about maybe some of those books and how did you set those relationships up?
Well, it kind of depends, because sometimes you have a co-author that's coming into your intellectual property and working with you in yours. And for instance, I have a very big popular series called the 1632 series, and I have a lot of co-authors who work with me. The actual terms for the specific book we're doing, everything's divided evenly. So they'll get half the advance, half the royalties, whatever. The overall intellectual property remains mine because I developed it. And the opposite is true if I'm working on someone else's intellectual property. If it's one you develop jointly, then you both own it jointly. And that's kind of how it works. And that's often not even contractually specified, because it's just understood that that's how it works. So that's kind of how that works. Where it can get trickier is if you're also dealing with dramatic rights, like if you're trying to get a movie or TV series, the thing there is that that industry tends to be very, very paranoid about chain of rights, because you very rarely hear about lawsuits in publishing, because there's frankly just not enough money for any one book. There really isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, the royalties of my best-selling book isn't as much as the coffee budget on a movie, seriously. Whereas with movies, there's so much money throwing around that I've been told, I can't swear to it, that movies, especially with any kind of big budget, will literally have an item in the budget for paying off frivolous baloney lawsuits.
Wow.
But it's easier to just pay them off than fight it.
Yeah.
So with these things, the chain of rights to exactly who owns what, you got to be more hard nosed. You got to be clear, very clear about it.
Yeah.
So in the cases, I wound up getting lawyer, I have my own lawyer and all this other stuff. You have to do a lot of stuff. It's really not that usually complicated in publishing, though.
That's great. So another thing I wanted to talk about is you are a judge for a number of contests out there.
Well, just one, the Writers of the Future contest, but that's far and away the biggest contest for new writers in science fiction in the English language.
So the Writers of the Future contest, what are some of the parameters of that if somebody were to enter that contest?
Well, in order to enter it, you have to be an amateur writer, and the way they define that is they basically follow the same rules as Science Fiction Writers Association does. If you have published 3 professional short stories, that is, you've published them in a magazine that pays professional rates, then you're no longer qualified. If you've published a novel, you're no longer qualified. And if you win the contest, you're no longer qualified. But if you're, if you don't fall under any of those, then you can enter the contest they run it 4 quarters a year, 4 times a year, and they've now been running it. I won first place in the winter quarter of 1992, which was the 9th year they've been set up. So I guess they've been running since 83. Wow. Yeah, so they're approaching 40 years now.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And you also have a number of books out. Your 1632 series is widely popular, but you also do different genres.
Oh, yeah.
What are a couple of those genres?
I've actually written something just about every subgenre of science. I've written science fiction, hard science fiction as they call it, space opera, epic fantasy, crossover fantasy alternate history. I write a lot of alternate history. That's what I'm best known for. I've written urban fantasy. I'm trying to think if there's anything I haven't done.
So where can they find more information about you?
Honestly, you can just Google me.
Yeah.
Really, if you Google Eric Flint, you will find me right away.
You're at a lot of Comic-Cons and you speak at a lot of conferences.
I come to a lot of conventions. I go to some Comic-Cons, not... every year I'll go to 2 or maybe 3. It depends. I will be at Dragon Con every year.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me, Eric. It's been great.
Sure.
And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.